Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia on Comcast Channel 66 and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Philadelphia City Council Majority Leader Catherine Gilmore Richardson. Our own Lance Haver will discuss plans for new local community health centers, and we'll preview tomorrow's City Council meeting, first of the season. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. It was great to see the kids out in the snow sledding, an actual realistic, real snow day. Schools weren't virtual, they were closed. Although that did give you daycare issues, right?
My son was outside for all of 15 minutes and said, "I don't like snow," and came back in the house.
All right. He's going to get his Bermuda shorts on and head for Florida.
Yeah, I think that's what it's going to be. So there's so much going on here tonight on the show. So what we're going to do is jump right into our interview with Majority Leader Catherine Gilmore Richardson.
Well, maybe not.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And maybe I shouldn't say council member, I should say Majority Leader.
Oh, thank you.
So congratulations. And can you tell us a little bit about that role and how you prepare for it?
Sure. Well, I will tell you that I am really honored and humbled to have been entrusted to be the Majority Leader for the 2024-2027 term. How you prepare for this role is just by being a good colleague, by building relationships, and being willing to serve and work with the leadership team to advance the agenda of the leadership team. And so I've tried to do that since I've been here day one, not only as a member but as a staffer, to ensure that I'm being a good colleague, that I'm building relationships, and that I avail myself to others so that they can, be the best that they can be in their roles as well.
So this week, council will start on Thursday, but this week there's been orientation for new council members and council members who've been around a little.
Yes.
What is that like, and how much information are the new people getting thrown at them in this first week?
Sure. Well, I'm really, really thankful and appreciative of Council President Johnson and his team pulling together a wonderful 2-day council orientation and training session for all of us, because even if you've been here for a while and this is not your first or second term, you can always use a refresher, right? No one is immune to ensuring that they know and understand not only the sort of rules and regulations that govern us as members of council, but really as a member of, I would say, the board of directors of the city of Philadelphia, but also as managers of our own teams, in each of our offices. And so I felt the training was exceedingly helpful, not just for me, but for the new council members and for their team members to really understand how things work internally and in the background here in council, but also to receive information, whether it's administrative services, whether it's the legislative process, whether it's related to the overall city HR, or just how things work in general. I thought it was exceedingly helpful to be there. And really, I love the budget part of the presentation, of course, because that's the part that I like a whole bunch. And so we had all of that training, and I was really very happy to see that Mayor Parker came to the training and spoke with all the council members and their team members. And also former Mayor Street was there as well. And so it was really nice to have that historical perspective, but also, again, the show of ensuring that we're working together from the administrative branch of government and also in council. It was a really wonderful training, and I'm happy that we were provided with the training.
Now, your career before you became a council member, you worked for Council Member Wendell Reynolds Brown, and you replaced her on council.
Right.
So it's a little different for you, maybe, but when you look at the new council members, how long do you think it takes to get acclimated to this job?
So that's a great question. I think we all come with a variety of skill sets and experiences that in different ways helps us to sort of get through this role and through the legislative process, which is the most important part of the work that we do. Obviously, constituent services and programming is very important, but our primary responsibilities are to ensure that we introduce legislation that will change the lives of the people that we serve in a positive positive way, right? But also to appropriate within the city budget. And so that's a process, right? That's the budgeting process is a process. How a bill becomes law is a process. And it's not just a step-by-step piece of how a bill becomes law that's on paper. It's the relationships, it's the communication, it's how you interact with the various constituencies that may or may not be impacted both positively and negatively by a piece of legislation. And that's something that, you really can't teach. That's something that you have to learn, by doing. And I will tell you that when I had the opportunity to work for former Councilmember Blondell Reynolds Brown, I remember our Chief of Staff, David, saying, it really takes you a good 3 years to learn and master the legislative process. And I had graduated from Westchester with a master's in public administration. I had a bachelor's in political science. I'm like, this is my world. I'm like, I'll get it. But it was something about that third year being a legislative aide that it just clicked. I can't even explain it. I just remember that third year, things really started to come together for me. And even when I became a member, my first bill and resolution that I introduced, which was a charter change around providing for a point preference for career and technical education students, it did not go as anticipated. And I had to sort of rewind and take myself back through the entirety of the legislative process again. And that was helpful for me. So I do think it's a learning process. It is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Learning how to effectively be a legislator and get legislation passed, but also how to ensure that you have community participation in that process, external stakeholder participation in that process, and that you're working in tandem with our other partners in government and in the city as a whole to get things done. So I do think it takes time. I think one term is great. Now, of course, I don't think you can count this past term because we were the first virtual members of council and had to learn how to do everything virtually. But now we'll be back in person. We'll have our council sessions in person. We'll have our caucus session prior to council in person. We'll have our hearings in person. And so that'll be a new challenge for some of us who never had the opportunity to fully do that in the last term. So I think this is an ever-evolving role. You're always learning every single day, and that's what I like the most about this work. You learn something new every single day. No day is the same. Not only from your schedule and from where you are in the city, but the issues that you're hearing about and the things that folks are facing in our city. No day is the same, and that's what makes it exciting and keeps us going. And I'm appreciative that I've had the opportunity to both serve as a volunteer, an intern, a staffer, as a chief of staff, as a member during the COVID period, which I'll call the virtual period, and now in person. I think I'll bring all of those experiences and the totality of that experience to this work, but it is very difficult to learn right away, and it takes time, but we are going to, and already have been, wrapping our arms around all of our incoming members, ensuring they have the supports necessary to be successful and get accomplished some of the things that they want to get accomplished here in council.
And you mentioned, I think, my favorite part of city council, which is budget.
Love it.
Budget's fantastic. It's going to start sooner than we realize.
Right.
It'll be here soon. And we've talked a little bit about this before, but how do you prepare for that? How do you start breaking the budget down? Because, it gets introduced early March, and then there's about a month, and then the hearings start.
Right.
So what do you look for? Because these documents are, these books are like 3 feet high each.
Right.
How do you prepare for that? How do you do that?
Right, so one, most of the budget binders aren't printed anymore, although I do ask for a printed version of the entirety of the budget detail every year because it's helpful for me. But for me, I don't start when the budget address begins. I don't start when we receive the budget detail. I start from prior years. I'm already going back, reading previous year testimony. It's really constituent cases that we may receive throughout the year. I'll look at those departments as well to look at their budget detail and see what's going on. But how I typically prepare is I'm looking at least the last 3 to 5 years of budget detail for comparison purposes. I'm looking at the last 3 to 5 years of budget testimony. I am looking at the current year budget detail. I'm reading throughout the year the quarterly city manager's report I'm keeping abreast of the PICA summaries of where our city budget is. I'm looking at overtime reports from a variety of departments. I'm keeping up with what's going on in the newspaper about, city departments or things that may be going on across the city. And all of that in its entirety, I bring all of that together as we review the budget and move into the budget process for each city department. And as we move to close the budgeting process and pass a budget that'll be approved by the PICA board so that it could be approved and we can move on to the next fiscal year. And so I'm looking at everything as we prepare for the budget, and that's each year. When I was in LA working for former Councilmember Blondell Reynolds Brown, I would literally take the budget detail binders home, all of the testimony from each of the departments, and I would sit on my front porch at my house in Winfield, and I would just sit out there on Saturdays. See, I didn't have any kids back then. I wasn't married, I didn't have children, so I had time. So I would sit on the porch on Saturdays, because by the time we get budget, it's usually getting warm out. And I would just go through, literally read every single page of the budget detail for each department. So we had, for that week, 8 to 10 departments. I would section those departments out. I would go through every single page. I would look through things that, didn't make sense. Maybe a contract has ballooned from one fiscal year to the next. Maybe staffing changes look weird. Maybe the numbers have decreased significantly or have increased significantly. Or maybe they're moving one firm from here to the next. Whatever it is, I'm looking for anything that does not look right in that detail. And then I'm matching up what they talked about in the testimony to what's in the detail. And then I just kind of go from there. So now I'm blessed to work with a legislative director and a staff who know that work very well, and they sort of do a bulk of that part of the work, but I also know things that I want to focus on, in the process, and I try to do that as well.
All right.
Yeah.
I'd like to bring Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Home here.
Thank you for joining us, Councilmember. We really appreciate it. Now, you were talking about how you break down the budget.
Yes.
And what what you see that you look for, what's important to you in that regard. Most of the people who live here in the city don't have access to that kind of detail. So when you sit down and you talk to your constituents and they ask you questions about the budget, how do you break it down so that people who aren't like me and Larry and follow the stuff, constantly because we're geeks and that's what we do,
Right.
so that they can understand it? Because let's face it, it's their money
Right.
that's being spent.
Right, and that's a great question. One, because my mom used to always tell me, Kathy, when you talk to me about the stuff you're doing at that job down there, break it down to a 4th grade level. And she was saying that to say, make it easy for me to understand, for anybody to understand what you do and how what you're doing impacts me as a tax-paying resident in the city. And so what I try to do is sort of talk about the budget by department when I'm talking to individuals based on what they care about, and or like overall numbers, and or how they pay taxes impacts our overall city budget, and then how from that, everything we receive, we provide quality service to individuals. We hire the city staffers to provide the quality service, and I try to break it down that way. Even for capital, I say it's the things you see, right? It's infrastructure, it's buildings, it's playgrounds. I try to break it down in a way that's easy for them to understand based on what the issue may or may not be. Yeah.
Now, during the mayoral race and the council race, one thing that I kept noticing, particularly if I was on social media, which you probably shouldn't base it, anything on social media, but that's where I was at the time. I saw a lot of people who were talking about government but seemed to betray a lack of knowledge
Right.
on how government actually works and how council actually works. What is the one thing that you constantly see people misunderstand about council, and how can we explain it to them so they don't, come to public comment and say something that makes those of us in the press gallery kind of giggle
Right.
because we know that that's wrong?
Right, and I think that's an important part of our work, that we have to do a better job in educating the broader public about what we're actually responsible for and what we actually do. I'll give you a more recent example. I was getting feedback on social media and from people in general saying, you need to close the schools down. You know, it's going to snow. Like, you need to close the schools down. Like, why did y'all do a 2-hour delay? And I'm like, well, you know, we're not directly responsible for the operation of the school district. The school district has a board, they have a superintendent. You know, we work obviously for an issue like that in tandem with the administration and also the Office of Emergency Management, as an example. But that's a lot to take in, instead of just saying, hey, I see you all the time, you're my member of council, you're responsible. So I think it's our job to ensure that our constituents and the people we serve better understand how government works for them. And that is incumbent upon us, right? That's not their fault, that's our fault. We have to engage more with them. We have to ensure that we're disseminating information that's easy to understand and to digest, so that they have a more robust understanding of what council does and what we're responsible for and what sort of everyone in this pie is responsible for. Because at the end of the day, we are responsible, right? Because we're their elected officials. We've been elected to serve them. And even if it's not something we're directly responsible for, we should be able to explain that to them. And I'm really encouraged by all the communication work that has already happened at the beginning of this term, and Council President Johnson's commitment to ensuring that we're having more robust stakeholder engagement both in and out of government.
Now, you're a at-large council person. Which is different from a district council person, because the district council person controls one district and at-large is kind of citywide.
Right,
And you're also the majority leader,
right.
and you're an at-large council person. Do you think that the fact that you're an at-large council person is going to have any kind of effect on on how you conduct yourself as majority leader? Because councilmanic prerogative is something that people, you know, hold on with both hands, and yet you're the majority leader for all of council. Do you think that that's going to have an impact?
Well, I'll tell you this, as far as we can tell, based on when the Home Rule Charter was instituted here in the city back in the 50s, I'm the first at-large member to be majority leader. And so what I plan to do is to, you know, take that awesome responsibility in ensuring that I'm working with all of my district colleagues and at-large colleagues on issues. I was blessed to serve on the Rules Committee last term, and so, you know, a lot of those councilmanic prerogative issues come through the Rules Committee, and we work with our colleagues all along the way to ensure not only there was understanding, but that we were being responsive to the concerns of the community, and I plan to continue to do that in serving as the majority leader.
Now, have you all sat down and talked about what your priorities budgetarily are as a group yet? Or is that conversation, is it too early to have that conversation?
So I don't think that it's too early. I think members are getting settled in and trying to get acclimated to being here in the hall and, you know, actually moving into their offices and their spaces and getting ready for the first council session. And so I think that's been a bulk of the work, but we've all had outreach from within the leadership team and Council President Johnson relative to what our legislative and budgetary priorities are, so that we have a robust understanding of what we'll have to focus on. I think we all heard Council President Johnson talk about, you know, the 5 sort of focus areas that we'll be focused on, which is gun violence, public education, poverty, business development, and housing here in the city. And so those will be some of the main issues that we'll all work towards. But, you know, obviously members will have their individual priorities as well. I know one area that I've been working on since last year that's budget related is, you know, sort of looking at the Office of Homeless Services with a fine-tooth comb, and I'll continue to do that work, and we'll continue to sort of really focus on that department. But we all will have priorities that we'll focus on in the budget process, and I'm sure that as the weeks continue, you'll see some of that unfold.
Okay, for my last question, you have daughters.
Yes.
Do they talk to you about what you do? Are they at all interested in what you do? And how does that make you feel that they are interested in what you do?
So, I mean, that's an awesome question. I'll say my oldest is 18 now, and she'll be graduating from high school and going to college. I'm so, so proud of her. She is not interested in politics at all because she wants to be a civil engineer. So I'm really proud of her. And so she votes and she does work on election day. So that I'm very, very happy about. Now, my youngest daughter, Catherine, she is type A personality, like superstar all in her own right. And the other day in the car, it just touched me so much. She said, "Mommy, I'm going to do what you do when I grow up." And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What do you mean, Mommy?" And she said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." And then my son said, he's younger than her, he said, "Mommy, me too." And I don't know that they knew exactly what that meant, but they do know some of what I do. They see me working, in the morning, at night, on the weekends. I bring them with me as much as I can. They understand that I do something important. They don't know exactly what it is. When I pick them up from school, some of their classmates will say, "Hi, you're the president." And I'll say, "I'm not the president." But you can't really explain it to a group of 9-year-olds. But I do the very best that I can. But they know it's something like important with the city and city council. And my daughter says she wants to be a council member when she grows up. So I just ask God to bless me and keep me to still be here to see that day. And I just want to create and leave a better Philadelphia for them than the one that we are experiencing now, particularly around this gun violence issue. I think we have a lot of positive points all across the city of Philadelphia and a lot of great things happening that we have to continue to highlight, but we know that we'll have to focus on the gun violence and the crime so that we have and give our young people the opportunity to have better lives.
Okay, well, thank you. And Larry, you got
No, that's about all. So.
All right, we'd like to thank Council Majority Leader Catherine Gilmore Richardson for joining us on the program. And we'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray. Denise?
Hi. Sorry I'm late. I was at Council Member Isaiah Thomas's press conference on name, image, and likeness deals. And unfortunately, mass transit does not cooperate when it's supposed to. Because our train from Suburban Station to Newark was 5 minutes late, and that threw everything into chaos.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Well,
So
soon they'll have a sign to tell you it's going to be late.
How nice of them.
Right.
yeah, that's just what we need. So Lance, I think people saw what you were talking about yesterday, yesterday in our newsletter, and you're going to tell us a little bit more about that today.
Well, we have a video of 2 people who use the Health Center 10 in the Northeast. But here's the issue. The Northeast part of Philadelphia, which at one point was the more affluent part of the city, over the last 30 years has seen a tremendous demographic change. As wealthier people have moved into the center city and all the surrounding areas, poor other families, middle-class families and people who are struggling economically have been pushed out. The level of poverty in the Northeast has grown by an unbelievable 350%.
Wow.
And it has been right. And that's in the last 30 years. The other thing that's happened, it's become the place where the largest number of immigrant families move to. It used to be in South Philadelphia or North Philadelphia or around University City. But those people who are being drawn to our country for the promise of a better life, most of them are now settling in Philadelphia in the Northeast. And so that creates a tremendous number of problems in terms of healthcare. And the city takes a long time to try and get things right. One of them is, you don't see the curve until it's too late, right? So the first year poverty grows, nobody really knows. Second year, third year, somewhere along the line, there's a tipping point and someone says, well, wait a minute. We should start looking at all of the services that we had for people in the Northeast based on the idea that the Northeast was an affluent neighborhood. And now that some of that affluence has disappeared, what are we doing? And I'd like to show the 2 videos of the 2 women. And in the end of the video, there's going to be an actual map that will show what a desert for healthcare the Northeast is, and then finish it up with a little bit more talk. So if we can show the videos. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. And Larry, you got
Thank you.
How nice of them.
So if we can show the videos. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. And Larry, you got
My name is Marie Juden. I worked for the city for about 14 years. I was a managed care nurse, Health Center 9, and I choose to have my family care here at Health Center 10. And sometimes I come and I have to wait in a line to register for more than an hour. And this is unacceptable, standing in line for that long. And I had both knees replaced, and so I have to call with my husband to have him stand in line for me because I can stand in the line for that long. And even before the surgery, I had bad arthritis of my knees, so I couldn't stand that long. And sometimes if my husband can't come, I have to ask people, I'm gonna be here when you're almost there at the end of the line. I will come, which is. And I don't think people should have to wait that long. And I heard that sometimes people would fall under the line. So I'm glad they do another way now, but we need another health center in the area.
Right.
We need another health center.
Yes, how long between appointments? How long do you have to
Oh,
wait?
6 months.
6 months between appointments?
Yes.
Okay, is there anything else you wanted to tell me?
I don't know. The city is doing a good job. Be the city, a former city employee.
But the city just needs another health
Just
center.
need another health center because we have a lot of patients here, and I used to, when I was a managed care nurse, I used to come here to when the managed care nurse is off. So I understand we need another center.
So does Philadelphia need another health center?
Yeah, we do. We do because actually I think this H10 where we are right now is actually congested on the sense that, for example, I came here 4 days ago when I did a walk-in, and they said I could come 7:30 to see the dentist.
You came at 7:30 in the morning.
7:30 in the morning, and up to like 12, they didn't attend to me. They asked me to wait 12:30, and I waited 12:30, and I left here like 2. Nobody attended to me. And I came here yesterday. That was the 16th. I was here, and still the same thing. I was here 7:30. And around 10, they said, oh, I should go and come back at 11. Then I went, I came back here 11, and I left, nobody attended to me. And today again, I came here 7:30. That's for dentists anyway. And I've been here since 7:30 till, I think if you see now, it's like maybe 10 or 11, and I'm still here. I haven't seen the doctor here. I remember, I think 3 weeks ago, I was here to do my blood work. And I made like 4 hours here, and I had to I left, and I had to come back for another appointment. I mean, that's a lot. If we had 2 health centers, or maybe 3, I think there will not be too much like population here. Then it reduces the help a lot. I think that will help the population a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How long do you think you'll have to wait until they get all your blood work back, until they can take care of you?
Oh, like if they take your blood, for example, sometimes they give you your result after like a week or so. I think that's too much for someone who is sick. You need your blood work done, and then you're expecting the result so that way you can have some medication. You can't just sit and wait for blood work for like a week. I think if we have 2 health centers, maybe 3, it will reduce the load, the workload for this one, and then that will be better for the community.
Thank you. Is there anything else you want to say?
Nothing much. Just like we need maybe another health center. If that's possible, that will be good for us.
Thank you. So it's obvious there's a need for another health center. The city's figured this out. Have the dollars in the capital budget to build them. One of the unique things about the city's health centers is they're actually revenue positive to the operating budget. The city has what's are called healthcare navigators that help people who come in find insurance, whether it's Medicare or Medicaid or it's something else. They help them find it. So it doesn't take any money out of the operating budget to operate one or two new health centers. The city has found two new places, one at the Frankfurt Transportation Center and one on the grounds of Friends Hospital, which is on the boulevard in the Northeast. And as that map showed, there's really only one. There are 50 health centers, federal or city health centers in the city of Philadelphia. Only one in the whole Northeast. I know there are some people who say, well, why do we need health centers? People can just go to the emergency rooms. And we hear these stories all the time. There's part of the attack on the poor saying, well, people have strep throats and they go to the emergency room and they just muck it up for everybody else. But the federal law doesn't require hospitals to treat chronic conditions in the hospital. Yes, if you are struggling and you're in an emergency situation and you're at risk of dying, the hospital has to, quote unquote, stabilize you. That's what the federal law requires. But that's it. They don't have to do anything other than stabilizing you. Now, if you're fortunate enough to have good quality insurance, they're going to find a treatment for you. But if you're uninsured or you're one of those people, because you didn't have the economic resources, were buying what were sometimes called bronze plans, you might find out that there's no way that you can afford the co-pays or no way that you can afford the treatments, and the emergency room is not required to do it. That's what the city health centers do. And the people of Philadelphia long ago, in 2003, had a ballot question. Should universal health care for all, be part of Philadelphia? It passed by 75 to 25. 75% of the Philadelphians said yes, universal health care should be in the Home Rule Charter. Home Rule Charter was amended, and now we see the city is trying to live up to that promise by building these two health centers. I know we're going to talk about what's next for City Council in the last part of this, but this is on the agenda for City Council. There is opposition to building the two new health centers. The one at the Frankfurt Transportation Center, which is a much smaller one, there's very little opposition to. The ones on the Friends Center, there is opposition to, and it's not clear to me at least what the opposition is. People who are opposing it are saying, well, can't we find a better site? And there are some challenges, and there's no question about it. No matter what site we pick, there's going to be some challenges for it. There is an older building that in the best of all worlds would be preserved, but for the last 30 years, they've been trying to find money to preserve the building. The Historical Commission has voted 7-3 to take the building down. People who are opposed to the new health center being built there are saying, well, we want to preserve the dilapidated, abandoned building. It seems just to be a convenient way of opposing a center, as we saw from the video. The health centers really attract and bring and support the poorest among us. You can only get care if you're a resident of Philadelphia. So if you're an undocumented worker, you haven't been here long enough to be a resident, you don't get care. But all people who are residents of Philadelphia get care on a sliding scale from $5 to $20. And there appears to be some thought that we as Philadelphians, even though we voted for universal health care, do not want to offer that universal health care to certain types of people. And that's what City Council is going to have to decide. They're going to have to decide in the next session whether they're going to go ahead and live up to the promise of the universal health care, live up to the promise that was made in the capital budget, and go ahead and build these two health centers, or they're going to make people wait for another 5 to 10 years to get the new sites found. And during that time, we often say these things without understanding them or feeling them. And I'm just like everyone else. Sandy Shea, the former editorial writer for the person who was in charge of the editorial board for both the Daily News and the Inquirer, once wrote an editorial where she said, how did we ever learn to step over homeless people? How did we ever learn to ignore them? And I think that that's one of these situations, where we look at these people who are desperate to get health care, and somehow we've gotten into the habit, or we've gotten into a position where we can say, well, they should just wait a little longer. And one of the people I interviewed for the story was somebody who was an advocate for the health centers, Carol Rogers. And what she said is there's no perfect place for a health center, but there is a perfect time, and the perfect time is now. But the thing that really struck me, and I make no secret about it, I am not a Christian. I was raised as a Jew. But the major opposition comes from a Christian church. And one of the people I interviewed, and I want to read it because it was really kind of amazing to me. One of them said to me, um, to those who oppose offering health care to those in need as quickly as possible, we ask what is more important, to allow a dilapidated vacant building to deteriorate further while the 30-year attempt to find funds to repair the building continues, or the health care of your neighbors. And then she went on to say, you don't have to be a Christian to take Christ's admonition to heart. Quote, in whatever city you enter, heal the sick that are therein. And then she just looked at me, and I don't hide the fact that I'm Jewish. I don't suggest otherwise. And she looked at me and she said, we can all be good Samaritans even if we're not Christians, and demand the health centers be built now.
But here's the thing, and I have experience with the health centers. When I was living in South Philadelphia, Health Center 2 was my main clinic. And I could go in there. I had a doctor and everything. And yet there were things that I still needed insurance to get done. Like they found a precancerous growth that they needed to remove. And I still had to I had to hang on until I got insurance in order to have that done. But yet the city passed a resolution demanding that universal health care be put into the city charter. Anything that, that I don't see that as being 100% universal. So what do you, I guess, do you think that there's something that citizens need to do to demand that universal mean universal in this case?
I do. And I think there's three things. One is on a local level, I think we have to demand adequate health centers be built. Those of us who are a little older remember that Rizzo closed the public hospital with the promise of their health centers would take over that role. So the reason why we have health centers is we're one of the few cities in America that doesn't have a hospital that serves an uninsured population. So we have to make sure that. Second, we have to look at the needs at all of the health centers and expand them. We have found a formula that allows us to look at that and expand the services without taking money out of the operating budget. And that is something that we should do on a continual basis. Well, I know there are a lot of issues for city council to look at, and I know that there are people who are uncomfortable talking about uninsured and the working poor and people who have health insurance, but the health insurance really isn't that helpful because they want to defend what commonly gets called Obamacare against the Republican attacks on it. And so there's a real reluctance to acknowledge Obamacare is a huge step forward, but it's certainly not sufficient. And Denise, as you're pointing out, the health centers are a huge step forward, but they're simply not sufficient. And the third thing I think we have to do is make sure we're going to be electing a United States Senator from Pennsylvania. And we have to make sure that those of us who believe in universal health care ask the candidates what they believe. There are people amongst us who believe that market forces are the best way to control insurance rates. And I want to tell this personal story. My father passed when I was a younger person, and he died of a heart attack in his home. And we knew he was having a heart attack. It wasn't his first one. And all I can think about, and he passed from that heart attack, but all I can think about when people talk about market rates was while he was having the heart attack and we were calling the emergency services, they would have had us calling around to find out which hospitals were having a sale on heart attack treatment that day. And that's the only way market forces would work, if we could comparatively shop for prices while I'm watching my father die. And of course, no one would do that. It's just a ludicrous idea that market forces will control healthcare costs. But we will have candidates for United States Senate that will be talking about how do we control healthcare costs. Do we, as former President Trump often promised to improve upon the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare by eliminating it. Strange concept. We're going to improve upon it by getting rid of it. And I think we're going to have at least one candidate for United States Senate who's going to talk about eliminating Obamacare as a way of solving the problem of health insurance being unaffordable. So those are the three things. Yes, we cannot let go of the promise in the same way that President Obama talked about we have not lived up to the constitutional promises yet. We have to continue to strive. We have not lived up to the promise in the city of Philadelphia of universal health care. We have to ensure that the centers are built. We have to look at what services are not provided and expand them, especially because we have now figured out how we can make that affordable for the city. And third, we have to continue to talk about why is healthcare based on employment? Why we're really the only industrialized country in the world that does that. It's an anachronism left over from years ago, and it really makes it very difficult for people to get quality healthcare.
This is one of those things that I feel like we could talk about all day because it's one of the most important issues. People's health. I I don't know how there's any other. There isn't much more important than that. And as a country, we spend a tremendous amount on healthcare and have some of the worst results of the industrialized world. It's amazing. And we get a lot of argument against what they call socialized medicine. When I look at the numbers, all these other countries have better healthcare outcomes than we do that have so-called socialized medicine. And infant mortality in this country is below some third world countries. It's astounding how poor we are in some of these areas. And then we talk about, the cost. How much would it cost? Well, it's cheaper. If we did Medicare for all, Medicare has it like a 3% margin overhead. It's virtually nothing. And if you make the risk pool, which is how insurance rates are calculated, things like that. If the risk pool is everybody, I mean, we're not really talking about tremendous expense here. The mental and verbal gymnastics required by people against a better healthcare system, not even talking about universal healthcare, but a better system, is astounding to me. It makes no sense. And there are reasons for that. And it all has to do with money.
And I hope now we're going to talk about what's coming up with City Council. I hope the two of you, when you interview the City Council people from the districts where the city wants to build the health centers, and the other council people, the ones at large, ask them. It's great when you say we like Bernie Sanders' approach to healthcare, but let's talk about what you can control and what you can do. It's really easy to point to what someone else should do. But when you're in a position of power and you can actually do something, the question is, what are you going to do? And so thank you very much for giving me the time. I will let our viewers know what the outcome is, but I think you'll know better than I will when you get a chance to talk to the district council people where the centers are being projected to being built, find out what she thinks, find out what she plans, and find out what she's going to do.
Right.
By the way, for those who are concerned, the Friends grounds have no neighborhood around it. It's surrounded by a tremendous amount of green space. And then, well, I guess if those of us who believe the people who are buried are a community, it's surrounded by two cemeteries. So I guess you could say the people in the graves are their neighbors, but I think that's a stretch. I'm not.
Although the wiseacre in me is thinking, a health clinic in the middle of two cemeteries.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sends a message.
Right.
Well, Lance, thank you so much, and we're going to be following this because it's one of the most important things going on right now. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Now, Denise.
Yep.
Big day tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow is the first meeting of city council that does not involve a whole lot of choirs for 2024. It's the first official session of council, and there's a few things like I literally just got a press release, and you probably have it too. You just haven't looked yet. From Vincent Thompson, who is the Director of Communications for City Council President Kenyatta Johnson.
I've heard of him. Talking
about, how this is going to be the first in-person meeting of council, and since we acknowledged that we had a COVID pandemic, and how everything is going to be, coming back to people being in person again. And there's also going to be presentations again. For those of you who have watched city council meetings in the past, after the prayer and everybody is, seated for council, there's usually presentations of resolutions that are, honoring a group or a person or commemorating something. And they have these presentations. Sometimes, there's like one person that gets, a thing, or sometimes, people bring their entire doggone family or the staff of their job or whatever it is relating to the proclamation. So those are coming back. And it's basically going to be city council pre-pandemic, except for one twist. When I spoke to Thompson earlier, he said that the one thing that everybody needs to understand is that they are going to be on time. Now, I will not believe that until I see it, because, on time, there's regular on time, meaning that you turn on your radio, you turn on your television at 10 o'clock and you can watch council. And then there is council on time, which is actually a lot closer to Ed Rendell on time, which means you might be anywhere from a half hour to 45 minutes to 1 hour late.
Breaking news, Denise.
Mm-hmm.
From Vincent Thompson.
Yes.
No presentations this week. The first should start in February.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Vincent. But that's what council is going to be. It's going to be a lot more. There's going to be in-person stuff, which means if you want to come to a committee meeting, like committee of the whole or education or anything, especially around budget time, all of those meetings are going to be in person now. So, it's going to be interesting to see how people adjust to being able to, and let's face it, part of what made a virtual council not as much fun as it could have been was the fact that they were using Microsoft Teams, which is the absolute worst system to conduct interviews that you can get. And because it's unreliable and everything else. So if but in a way, I have concerns. And one of the concerns I have is COVID isn't gone. I'm not saying we necessarily need to go back to virtual meetings, but COVID isn't gone. And I'm hoping that council takes that into consideration. Like if people come in wearing masks and stuff, something that will, tick off Lynn Landis, who is a frequent public commenter, but she'll live. She'll get over it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's definitely a new day.
Mm-hmm. So we keep getting told.
Yes, yes. But it is, because we have a new council president, different style, different way of managing things. That's the first thing I'm going to be looking for. How is Council President Kenyatta Johnson running the meeting? And I'm not comparing him to Council President Darrell Clark at all. It's more of how do you put your own stamp on it? What do you do? And I think it would be unfair to compare anyone to Darrell Clark because, he had his own way of doing things, and Council President Johnson has to find his way of doing things.
Mhm.
And the way he does things tomorrow may not be the way he does things a year from now, because there's an adjustment to this job. It's a hard job. So it'd be really unfair to say day one,
Mhm.
this is going to go 100% right. It's not like that for anything, especially something as complicated as this. But with that said, I do think in terms of the way the meeting operates, public comment, all that, I would expect it to be kind of similar
Mhm.
to the way Darrell Clark ran things because, that's who Johnson learned from. That was the council
Right.
president, I believe, the entire time he was on council.
Mhm.
So you have somebody who really learned from a master of city council, and I think that's a good thing. And with our new membership, it's going to be interesting to see who takes on what role, who's championing which issues. I think we already may have a feel for that,
Mhm.
but generally speaking, it'll be interesting to see where kind of everything lines up with our new membership, and how many people have not served a full term on council.
Mhm.
That's not including the freshmen; it's including other council members who came in the middle or
Right.
even later in the last term. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of new people involved with varying degrees of experience on city council. And honestly, maybe that's not such a bad thing.
Well, it's going to keep things interesting because if we learn nothing else from the mayor's race, we learned that Darrell Clark was really good at herding cats.
Yep.
Because one thing that we did find out throughout the mayor's race is that despite the appearance of council being a happy-go-lucky unified group, you had people on council who really did not like each other.
Yeah.
And what's going to be interesting with the new council is, and it's going to be interesting to see how Council President Johnson navigates, particularly some of the more progressive members of council, because they've increased in number, and they're going to try to kind of put more of their stamp on things, and that's and depending on how you look at it, that's either very good or very bad. Um, One of the things that's going to be reintroduced, and it's kind of related to me being late, to be on the broadcast, is the name, image, and likeness bill that council member Isaiah Thomas, who is the majority whip now, um, introduced and got passed in the last session. Now, it passed council unanimously in the last session, and my guess is it will do so again. But the reason why they're having to vote on it again is because the mayor's office, did what's known as a pocket veto, meaning that they sat on the bill until the next session of council had to be sworn in. Under the city charter, if the mayor gets a bill and sits on it for 10 days, it automatically becomes law unless you are changing councils, unless a new session is about to start. And there were several bills that were really not really kind of innocuous that he let die on the vine because of that. So you're going to see at least one of them, the name, image, and likeness bill, reintroduced tomorrow.
And just on that, nobody can really figure out why.
Well, actually, my sources are telling me that the reason why the bill was not signed was because the mayor's office thought that the city would be liable financially for some of the stuff attached to it. The problem with that is the city's not liable for anything financially attached to this bill. Temple University is basically saying, we will give this service to kids in the city who are athletes so that they can take advantage of name, image, and likeness, and we will walk them through it. We will have legal people that help them through it, and you will get legal opinions, and you're not going to have to pay a dime, and they're not going to ask the city for a dime, which tells me that quite possibly the mayor did not read the bill before he decided to not pass it, which and I hate to say this because it it became very obvious to a lot of people before it became obvious to me. But I'm starting to think that when, folks say that Mayor Kenny pretty much took the last year of his term off, that they might not have been as wrong as I thought. But it's, it's kind of, it's kind of sad that there's this repetition that council is going to have to go through on some of these bills because they didn't get signed into law the first time. But my hope is that, this new council will show us some things that, we might do differently in the city, because it seems like it's made up more of people who have been somewhere else at least once. And I often say that, Philadelphia's coat of arms should include the phrase, "That's the way we've always done it," because that is what I hear most often whenever I suggest we do something that someone somewhere else has done. So I'm hoping that maybe we can get that removed from our coat of arms with this group of folks in council.
Well, if Councilman Harity has his way, we'll have a new flag. So maybe.
And I don't understand for the life of me why that's important to do now.
Why would you want to get rid of this is what I want to know.
And the thing is, we have the 250th anniversary of Philadelphia coming up, of the country coming up. And it's now really the best time to do that. We've got Philadelphia. We just heard an interview where a woman was told that she would have to wait for 6 months to get an appointment for the knees that she had replaced. She can't even stand in line to, get her health care needs taken care of. And we're worrying about a flag.
Yeah. And Denise, that's a really, really important point. We have the new council, we have the new mayor.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying necessarily tomorrow, but in the next couple of weeks, the next month, I think up before budget, I'm going to be disappointed if we don't start seeing some serious legislation. I've been told maybe it doesn't work that way. Maybe we can't wait on some of these things. Health centers, that needs to get done. Anti-poverty programming, that needs to get done. Anti-violence programming, that needs to get done. And it needs to happen now.
Yeah, that's true. I'm stunned at the fact that there is only one health center in the entire Northeast.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't really make sense, because one health center would imply that we're looking at a relatively small group of people, and we're not.
No. Well, when Lance said 350%, that's how much the poverty rate in that area has increased. And when you hear that, we know it almost, maybe it becomes rote when we keep saying, worst big city in America. But it's actual people. And that was one of the most important and poignant parts of Lance's piece there, is talking to those people and saying, well, what is this like for you? And that's what it's like. And I can't imagine. I've never had to deal with that. I'm very lucky that my entire life I never had to wait that long to see a doctor for a common problem. Nobody should have to do that. Nobody in the United States of America. What are we talking about here?
And the thing is, with the high percentage of people in poverty here in Philadelphia, and particularly with all of the ailments that come with poverty, like diabetes and high blood pressure and stuff, that stuff you can't wait on.
No.
You
shouldn't have to wait on anything. You shouldn't have to wait on anything.
No, you shouldn't, but you really can't.
Mm-hmm.
I spent the whole month of November 2011 in the hospital because I did not have health insurance and I had a complication of my diabetes. So you're right. This needs to be taken care of yesterday.
All right. So that's all the time we have for tonight. Next week, we are going to have a council member. It has not been confirmed yet exactly. It'll be confirmed tomorrow. So we will send out a tweet about that. But we're very excited. We're going to be talking to a lot of council members over the next few weeks. So we hope to see you next week on Hall Monitor.